thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Obsicast. We're still at breaking convention, and we can't get enough of these experts and exciting views and opinions and research. One of the people that I had the privilege of attending his talk is Dr. Simon Ruffell, who is a psychiatrist, a researcher, and a student of Cuarenterismo. He is very knowledgeable when it comes to Western medicine, as well as the indigenous knowledge, and he's definitely building a bridge, and he has agreed to be our guest today. Thank you so much
it's a pleasure
for joining us today. So let's start with your personal story. You were a doctor, you spent time at NHS, you did all the hard work and those years and years of studying, and everyone who has lived close to a doctor in the UK knows how much hard work goes into it. But somehow it wasn't enough for you.
Yeah.
Tell me what happened.
Yeah,
Tell me your story.
Sure. Yes, no, so you're right. So I trained in Western medicine, and the only reason that I went to medical school was because of psychiatry. I was totally fascinated in the mind from a really early age, actually, and specifically with mental illness. I was particularly interested in what happened when the mind, so-called, went wrong. Like, what was that? What is schizophrenia? What is psychosis? What is it when people get these kind of paranoid delusions or the hallucinations? Like, what actually is that? And I went to medical school and then spent many years not studying psychiatry, not studying the mind, and begrudgingly learning every single bone in the foot, for example, and thinking, this is not what I want to be doing. And then eventually, when I graduated med school, I started working in psychiatry. And I absolutely loved it to begin with. Like, I did really, really like it. I loved the patients, I found them fascinating. I really wanted to help them. I found the mind fascinating. The culture around psychiatry, the people I was working with, I really liked that. I really enjoyed it. But there was one main issue with it, was that most of the drug treatments that we used weren't that effective. And it's not that I'm anti-drug, against drugs and against pharmacological treatments, not at all. I think there's definitely a role for them, especially in safety. So if people are unable to guarantee their own safety, if they might take their lives or they might harm somebody else, it may well be that you need to use a pharmacological treatment. And I think that they can be used for safety in that domain. But in general, the psychological treatments that we had, the pharmacological treatments, just weren't that effective. So antidepressants and treating depression and anxiety, they were never supposed to be used long term. So actually, when they were first synthesized, when they were first invented, they were described as being these things that you're supposed to take for a few months, and it gets you out of a bit of a rut until you can treat the root cause of your problem and move on. But unfortunately in psychiatry, that didn't happen, and we ended up using a lot of these drugs long term. And so I began to get more and more disillusioned when I was working with our patients, and it became more and more frustrating and upsetting. It became really upsetting, actually, seeing clients come in, especially like young people, like in their early adulthood, and knowing that if they had a diagnosis of schizophrenia, that was pretty much going to be it. We might be able to help them a bit, but if they were coming back in a few times with schizophrenia, a lot of their lifetime was going to be spent in and out of psychiatric hospital. And I really struggled with that. I really, really struggled with that. And so I did decide to look further afield, but to be honest, I decided just to stop working in psychiatry and then to figure out what it was that I was going to do next. And so I ended up doing a few things. I went and worked in Uganda for a while. I was working with child soldiers, people who used to be child soldiers. That was actually the time that I had my first contact with traditional healers, which was really beginning to open my mind. So I was working in an area of Uganda, in northern Uganda, called Gulu. And I found that on the psychiatric ward that I was working on, most of the staff members there would finish work and they would go to the local witch doctors, despite being trained in, as psychiatric nurses. And all of them were saying the same thing, saying how it was real medicine. And that when you go to the witch doctors, what they do, it's true, and it's not just, make-believe. And I actually started setting up meetings with these traditional healers based in Uganda. And we were doing teaching days where I would spend half the day teaching them about Western medicine, and they would spend the other half of the day teaching us about traditional medicine, trying to set up a referral pathway between the two different types of medicine. And then when I finished working there, I ended up in South America, and I don't believe it was by chance. I actually believe it was by fate. I ended up sitting next to somebody who was training in Shipibo Cuarenterismo, Shipibo being an indigenous group based in the Peruvian Amazon. And this man was just telling me all these amazing things. So he was telling me about his work with ayahuasca. And he was telling me that ayahuasca successfully could treat a lot of these conditions that I've been really struggling to treat in my own patients back home. And he was telling me that by working with these traditions, by working with these indigenous peoples, they could communicate with spirits. They could literally go to the spirit world and they could ask spirits to heal patients on their behalf. And what's more, if I went down to the jungle with him, he'd introduce me to these indigenous peoples, and then they could also teach me how to do it as well. And they could do some work on me. And so that was enough for me. I was like, this is fascinating. Whatever this is, I want to go with you, and I want to explore this and experience it. And so I ended up in the Amazon rainforest drinking ayahuasca for the first time. This was in 2015. And I had an amazing experience, but it wasn't the kind of experience where it transformed my life and then I thought I was going to work with ayahuasca for the rest of my life. Not at all. I came out of that experience still very kind of Western medically minded, and I thought, this is it. I've found the antidepressant that might be able to really help people. I can't believe that more research hasn't been done into ayahuasca. So I started looking into the research that had been done into ayahuasca, and there was some early stage research that had been done into it. So specifically syncretic churches looking at the use of ayahuasca in services that combined Christianity with ayahuasca. But there wasn't much at all in terms of scientific research that was done into ayahuasca in a traditional context in the Amazon rainforest. There are some anthropological research, but not really scientific research. So I designed a study with a colleague of mine looking at the effects of ayahuasca on personality. Back then, nobody wanted to fund research into ayahuasca, so I ended up self-funding that first study. And we found some pretty interesting results showing that ayahuasca could decrease neuroticism, it could increase people's openness, and we published that study and got quite a good response. And then following that, ended up getting some funding from the Medical Research Council, which is part of the UK government. And that allowed us to start looking at the effects of ayahuasca on epigenetic change, which is the way that our environment changes the expression of our DNA. And it looks like those changes can be passed down through generations as well. And then we started looking at common mental health conditions. And during that time, I started doing a PhD into ayahuasca and mental health. And when I was doing that study looking at epigenetics, I had an experience which completely transformed my worldview. Up until that point, I've been trying to fit everything into a Western framework. All the experiences that I've been having, I've been trying to explain it from a Western point of view. And it's been getting harder and harder to do that. But this experience happened, and it just wasn't possible for me to explain it from a Western point of view anymore. And almost overnight, I flipped to having a more Shipibo understanding of the world. I started training in Shipibo Cuarenterismo, Shipibo shamanism during that time, and have been training in that ever since. That was 2019. I set up the organization ONAIA, which does research into ayahuasca in the Amazon rainforest, and decided to try and start conducting our research projects to be more in line with indigenous peoples, to do it really in partnership. And so that involves coming up with ideas for research together with the Indigenous curanderos that we work with, analysing and interpreting the results that we get together, and then making sure that those results are available to the communities that we work with. So that's a little bit of a potted version about what I've been up to for the last 10 years.
It sounds fascinating. So starting from what the exchanges that you've had with your Shipibo teachers, first of all, what do they think about what lacks, what's missing in the Western medical science?
I mean, the easy answer to that is the spiritual component. So in general, they think of Western medicine as being particularly good for acute trauma, like battlefield medicine. So if you're in a car crash, you know, or if you have, you know, some kind of injury like that, Western medicine is very good at treating those things. But when it comes to a lot of psychological things, anything that has a spiritual component, Western medicine, in my opinion, and definitely according to the Shipibo, is definitely lacking. So the way that the Shipibo describe healing happening is on 3 different levels, on 3 different planes. And so initially you have the spiritual plane, and it's all about balance. So I was really surprised when I first started working with the Shipibo that they actually rarely talk about healing. They talk about bringing everything back into a state of balance, everything back into a state of harmony, and as a result of that, as a byproduct, you get healing. And so the first plane is the spiritual plane. And if you are out of balance on the spiritual plane, most Westerners probably wouldn't feel that unless you're particularly sensitive or if you have some kind of training in Cuarenterismo or some kind of shamanism. But if you don't address that, then it begins to manifest on the next plane, which is the psychological plane. And so you begin to develop things like anxiety, depression, other kind of mental health conditions. And if you still don't address that, then it begins to develop on the physical plane. And so that's when you develop disease and you develop illness. And so Western medicine largely focuses on that physical plane, on just one of the planes. So the Shipibo, in my experience, they feel that we're kind of blind. We're missing these other dimensions to healing. We're missing a lot of the bigger picture. And they always joke with me, you know, why do the gringos, you know, why do the Westerners, why do they wait until things are really, really bad until they come to us? I think that a lot of people use ayahuasca as a last resort, but it's also because people aren't addressing these imbalances on the spiritual plane and on the psychological plane, and they just come to the curanderos when they're, you know, really in dire straits.
And you also mentioned something interesting about what's missing in hospitals. So they asked whether there's a shaman at hospitals.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is very strange for Westerners.
Yeah.
To even think that you would have a shaman.
Yeah. This is when I was speaking to them about, you know, the so-called psychedelic renaissance. And I was speaking to Don Rono Lopez, who's the curandero I apprentice with. And, you know, I do some work, and especially in the past, less so now, with psychedelics in lab-based settings and hospital-based settings. And I was describing everything to him just to get his take on it. And initially he says, oh, that's great. You know, that's really, really great that Westerners are taking an interest in these medicines. That's awesome. And then he said, so, you know, what does it look like? Who do you have in the room in the ceremony? And I said, oh, you know, well, we have usually a psychiatrist and, you know, a psychologist perhaps. And he said, great, yeah, but who's doing the energetic work? You know, who's there to remove negative energies, to remove these energetic blockages? Who's there to remove a demon, to do an exorcism if you need to? And I was kind of saying, well, you know, we don't really kind of use those concepts in Western medicine. You know, it's more, we'll sit there, you know, we'll talk to the patient if they have an issue. It's like, okay, well, great, but yeah, if they have like a demonic attachment, who's going to do the exorcism? So, I mean, we just don't talk like that. You know, we don't really kind of use that paradigm. And he was saying, wow, that's incredibly dangerous. So that's actually the example he gave, which was super interesting. The analogy was, that's like going to an airport and going out onto the runway and not knowing which plane you're going to get on, and randomly getting on any plane, and then just seeing where it ends up. And it could end up in Ibiza, great, or it could end up in Gaza, which would be awful. And so it's a real risk. It's really rolling the dice when you work with these psychedelics. But interestingly, I've also had the same response from Western psychiatrists as well. So when I was based at King's College London, I was based there for years, and some of the criticisms that I get about my research, which is all based in the Amazon rainforest, with curanderos, in traditional settings with ayahuasca, they would say, okay, so what medical facilities do you have? And I mean, there's not really medical facilities, it's deep in the Amazon rainforest. There's the traditional medical facilities, but not like a hospital. And they say, okay, but who's the psychiatrist who's there, with you during the ayahuasca ceremonies? So we don't have a psychiatrist, it's the curanderos who are there. They're like, oh, well, what happens if something goes wrong? Well, the curanderos they'll remove energetic blockages, and they'll do an exorcism to remove demons. And they said, well, you don't have any rescue medications? You don't have benzodiazepines in case somebody, starts panicking? That's incredibly dangerous. I can't believe you would do that. It's incredibly dangerous. Like, you guys are all saying the same thing, but it's just opposite. You just are unaware of each other's paradigms. And there's something kind of ironic about that, I found. Yeah.
But is there a point in which both are necessary? Do you think that one can live without the other? Especially for the Western people, with their traumas and life experience. Because one thing that I worry about is that when Westerners go into these ceremonies and they leave it with an open heart and susceptible to the energies that they have to deal with, it could be tough. So do you think that there are scenarios in which we need both?
For sure. I mean, I think it can be problematic and it can be dangerous for Westerners just to jump into another paradigm. So, you see many people going to ayahuasca retreats for a couple of weeks in the Amazon rainforest, and then they go back to work on Tuesday in a bank. And over the last 2 weeks, they've had all these encounters with these entities, these spirits, and everyone around them during that experience has been saying, oh, you've been seeing these entities, you've been communicating with spirits, this is all real. And then they go back to this Western framework, this Western setting, and they can't speak to anyone about it. Because for most people in the Western framework, if you say to someone like, yeah, I was just talking to this spirit, they'll probably think you're kind of losing it a bit. And I experienced this massively as a psychiatrist where, for years I was going back and forwards to the Amazon rainforest, and this was before I kind of shifted my perception of reality into more kind of shamanic Shipibo Cuarenterismo worldview. But for years I was trying to fit what I was experiencing into a Western framework. So I'd be with Don Rono, and I'd be describing these experiences that I was having, and Rono would be saying, yes, that's because this entity, this spirit's trying to communicate with you. And I'd be saying, well, actually, Rono, I think you'll find that the brain is a excellent predictive mechanism, and we're specialized to see faces. So that's why I keep seeing faces in these ayahuasca ceremonies. Thank you very much. And Rono would just look at me and be like, oh, I see one. And then maybe you're just ignoring, what's the obvious thing that's happening right in front of you. And then I would go back to King's College London and eventually pluck up the courage to speak to a psychiatrist there and say, do you think there's any chance that these entities, that these spirits could be real in the jungle? And they'd have this exact same response. They'd be like, no, Simon, yeah, you've been taking too many drugs in the jungle. And I felt like I was in this in-between, I was stuck between the two worlds. And so when Westerners engage in shamanic practices, when they engage in things like psychedelics that can really drastically shape your worldview, I think we have to have the Western support there. We have to have therapists, we have to have psychiatrists and psychologists that are trained to be able to manage that, trained to be able to deal with that. because Indigenous peoples, they don't have kind of preparation and integration sessions per such. But if you know you're feeling a bit ungrounded, you know, if you want to speak to somebody, you just speak to the curandero who lives like, you know, 3 huts down the road. You know, it's that support is there. It's built into the culture. You don't have that kind of that isolation that you can get in Western societies, which can lead to this ontological shock. So this kind of painful change in worldview, where you're kind of forcibly questioned, forcibly required to question everything you think about the universe, which can be really anxiety provoking as well. So I think we have to blend them for Westerners, for this Western psychedelic renaissance.
Incredible. So you have spent about 10 years with your Shipibo teachers. Tell us about their worldview. Because they work with energies. They're less about material. How do they see us?
Yeah. So the first thing to say is that one thing I love about this work is the more I study about the Shipibo, and when I speak to people from other Indigenous traditions about the Shipibo worldview, there's normally a time when they're listening and then they just say, yeah, we have that too, but we just call it this, we call it something else. And so what I'm coming to understand is that there is some degree of quote unquote reality with these Indigenous cultures, and the way that they describe the world is that they all have, but they have different ways of describing it. And so like many other shamanic traditions, the Shipibo describe 3 planes of existence. So you have the physical plane, which is where most of us spend most of our time. So that's where all humans are, animals, plants, everything that we hopefully know and love. And then you have the next plane of existence, the next one up, which is called the Ani Nutta. Ani in Shipibo means kind of large, kind of big. Nutta doesn't really have a direct translation, but it kind of means like your own personal universe, or kind of like the space, roughly. And that's the spirit world. That's the land of the spirits, where the spirits reside. And so curanderos, when they drink ayahuasca, or when anyone drinks ayahuasca, they go to this Ani Nutta. And that's where the plant spirits are. That's where people's ancestors are. And that's where you can really heal people in the spirit world. And then above that, you have this next plane of existence, which is called the Nutta Ibo, which is largely the creator spirits. So this is the protectors of each dimension. They live there. It's somewhat akin to maybe the idea of God, not quite, but somewhere along those lines. Yeah, and I found that absolutely fascinating. And again, in Western culture, we largely only focus on this one plane of existence. But in so many of these traditions, there's at least 3 different ones that you can interact with.
What do they think about reincarnation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I was super excited to ask them this. I was like, yeah, what do you think? And I described reincarnation, and when I asked them, they initially said, no, that doesn't happen. And I was like, oh, really? Because that kind of flies in the face of so many other Eastern traditions. But then they said, but what does happen is that energy gets recycled. So energy from your ancestors gets recycled into you. So you'll be carrying some energy from your ancestors. And then energy from other people in the past, if there's a resonance, it can also get recycled and it can end up in you as well. And so our makeup, our energetic makeup, does have like energies from other people's previous lives, from our ancestors. It's like a mix of all these different things. And when I've spoken to Tibetan Buddhist practitioners, that seems more in line with the way that they describe reincarnation. It's not as simple as, you know, in a past life I was a fisherman, and then before that I was, I don't know, like a knight, and then before that I was like a caveman. It's actually that there's different energy that comes from these different people, and it gets recycled. And then so in our DNA, in our being, in our energetic field, we have this kind of mismatch of lots of different people's energies from the past as well. So I personally don't see any kind of clash in these worldviews. I think that it actually ties together quite nicely.
Karma?
Karma is an interesting one. So the practitioner that I work with and that I apprentice with, he's not Shipibo. He's really into Buddhism, really into Buddhism. And so in the Shipibo icaros that he sings, he quite often brings Sanskrit into there. And then, we together diet plants that aren't traditionally Shipibo. So for example, blue lotus, which is heavily associated with kind of Eastern mystical traditions. And he frequently sings about karma to undo karmic patterns, to undo karmic cycles. And so that, is something that I've seen worked on, but not traditionally Shipibo. To be honest, I haven't spoken to the Shipibo directly about karma, but they do speak, a lot about balance and being in balance with the natural world, being in balance with the universe. There's this, the idea of reciprocity, this concept of reciprocity in many indigenous traditions, including the Shipibo. And if you don't give back, if you're not in balance, then negative things will happen to you. So maybe, that's kind of slightly getting towards karma, but that's not something that I've spoken to them directly about.
And in your talk, you talked about their view about multiverse.
Yeah. The multiverse is largely those three planes that I mentioned before. So the kind of the earthly plane, the Ani Nutta, and the Nutta Ibo as well. It's kind of the three main dimensions. But interestingly, this is like super interesting. Like I find this work infinitely fascinating. And when you train in Shipibo, the cornerstone of that training is master plant dietas. And so you basically go into isolation and you spend prolonged periods of time trying to starve yourself from everything, basically. From food, from water, from any kind of social contact. And you drink small amounts of plants that are deemed to be enlightened or a master plant, a great teacher. And they describe opening up your energetic body so that you get to know this plant and it becomes an ally. And then in ceremonies, you can ask it to heal on your behalf. And initially, when I first started dieting plants, I thought, okay, you get to know the spirit of this plant. Perhaps that spirit is similar to you or I, you just get to know it. But actually, the deeper that I've gone into Shipibo Cuarenterismo, it's not just a spirit. It's not even just a world. It's an entire dimension. Each plant has an entire dimension with an entire population of spirits that exist within that dimension. And so it's possible when you diet plants, you get to know one of, infinite numbers of these spirits, of these plants within that dimension. So it's a little bit like an equivalent of if somebody dieted, humanity, you would open up the doors. If a plant dieted humanity, you would open up the doors to humanity and you could get to know either you or I or Rick Doblin or whoever it is, and we'd all have slightly different characters. And so when we think about it like that, then there's actually infinite dimensions and each plant contains its own dimension with an almost infinite number of species. But then to take it even further, it's not just the plants. So you can diet anything. Like you can take small amounts of anything and open up that dimension. And this is kind of the Shipibo understanding of animism, but it takes animism slightly further. So you don't just diet plants. Like the curanderos I work with, most of them have dieted rocks, these rocks from the Amazon rainforest.
They eat them?
No, you just put the rock into water. You basically marinate like a rock in water, and then you just drink this kind of rock water.
How long do you have to do it?
How long do you leave it soaking?
Yeah, the diet. So you said you have to isolate and don't eat, don't drink, except for whatever it is that you're dieting on.
Yeah. So, the shortest time really for the first diet is 2 weeks.
2 weeks of no food and no water.
So you would normally try and avoid having water for 3 days, and then no food for as long as you can.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you've done this?
Yeah, many times. Yeah. It's like that's like the learning. That's how you do it. That's the training.
But after 3 days, you can drink water.
Yeah, it's not it's not like strict as in it has to be this amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
So you form an agreement, you make a contract with that spirit, with that being.
Mm-hmm.
So you agree with that spirit on how long it's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, if you're feeling particularly strong, you can say, I'm not going to eat for 2 weeks. But if you're not feeling particularly strong, you can say, I'm not going to eat for 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about your conscious communication, your conscious agreements
Mm-hmm.
with that spirit.
And you have done this with certain plants?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, yeah.
rocks?
No, only plants. I haven't quite got to the rocks yet.
And how was it for you?
Yeah, I mean...
So you communicated with the spirit of that plant, specific plant?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is extremely personal and extremely
Mm-hmm.
sacred.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I have to be careful with, you know, kind of how much I share about that. But yeah, for sure, it's the most beautiful and magical thing.
So is it like an
do.
ayahuasca experience or a mushroom experience?
No. It's more like it's like starting a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's like starting a relationship. I mean, you literally are starting a
Mm-hmm.
relationship. So you get to know someone or something that just isn't in this world, that isn't in this dimension. It's really, really hard to describe because it's outside of our paradigm or understanding in the West. But it's beautiful. You get to know the spirit of this plant, and it can communicate with you in many different ways, either in ayahuasca ceremonies, either in dreams, and it comes to you, it works through you, you introduce yourself, you form this hopefully this loving relationship. You meet this friend or this lover that is in a different world, that can kind of see us from a bird's eye view, and they can help us, and they can work with us. And I've heard an Ashaninka, which is another indigenous tribe, an Ashaninka leader, talking about why plants help us. He was telling a friend of mine, Jeremy Narby, and he said that plants they're like an ancient species. They're like the grandparents. And us humans, we're going through a teenage rebellion. Like, we don't know what's good for us. It's the equivalent of like a teenager, like smoking loads and kind of doing lots of dangerous stuff. But instead, we're destroying ourselves, we're destroying each other, we're destroying the planet. And so the plants, the spirits of the plants, as these grandparents, they can't help but help us. They feel this responsibility to help us. And so when we open up these plant dietas, we can form these beautiful relationships. But it requires dedication. It requires, if you're on that path fully, completely transforming your life. It completely transformed mine, for sure. And interestingly, you know, the way the Shipibo describe it is you become like a mutant. So your being, your energetic body, who you are at your core, fuses with the energy of this plant, of this being, and you become more and more like the plant. The Shipibo literally say, keep dieting until you become the plant. Keep dieting until you transform into Onaya Rao, into the tree. That's what you need to do. And what I noticed in myself is that you know, I was, on my mind was, okay, is my personality going to completely shift? Who will I be at the end of this process? And I am a very different Simon to when I first started dieting, but in the most amazing and beautiful way. I feel like it completely returned me to my essence, to who I was before, you know, the bullshit of life got in the way, and you develop these maladaptive coping mechanisms before you learn to interact with the world in a way that's a bit defensive or a bit maladaptive. And it kind of returns you to who you are, that childlike innocence, but also with this beautiful maturity. Honestly, I can't attest enough to the power and the benefit of master plant dietas. If there was one thing about psychedelics, about traditional medicine, about shamanism in general, which I would say was that the most important number one thing is master plant dietas and the role that that has. And the amazing thing about that is you don't even have to drink ayahuasca to do that. You know, that's literally going into isolation and drinking a small amount of this kind of woody water. It's not even psychedelic, it's just spiritual.
Do you only do this when you're in the Amazon, or do you do it here as well?
I do it in Europe as well. I do it in Europe. In general, it's better to be around the plants that you're dieting. But I have some of the plants here, and so I do it in Europe too.
And is it just any plant, or is the shaman?
Yeah, I mean, you can diet any plant. I mean, you can diet anything.
I'm not sure about anything.
No, seriously, anything. Yeah, you could. Like, and also, so it's animism,
chair
right?
juice?
Yeah, it's animism. So in animism, everything is conscious. Everything is alive. And so a really great example of this is Agua Florida, which is this alcoholic flower water. It's a room deodorizer. Made in New York, mass-produced, and it was adopted into the shamanic toolkit, into the Shipibo shamanic toolkit, just before the ayahuasca boom. The Shipibo noticed that it seems to be particularly good at repelling negative energy and getting rid of negative attachments. Really good for protection in ceremonies. And they say it's the spirit of Agua Florida that does that. And so you can diet this Agua Florida. This is just alcohol water, mass-produced in New York. And so the curanderos, they drink small amounts of this, go into isolation, and get to know the spirit of that. You can do that. You can totally do that. You could also, I mean, people are dieting, the curanderos are dieting rocks, they diet animals. You can diet animals as well. You can even technically diet humans. Like, I could diet you. It would be like the essence of you.
How would you do that?
I mean, I'm not recommending that we do this. I think that would be slightly strange. But I mean, I did actually speak to my curandero about this, and it was like, what happens if I dieted you? And he kind of looked at me like a crazy gringo. But like, he was like, no, you can just, you could take like a piece of my hair, and then you could like put that in water, and then you could just like, I don't know, connect to the essence of me, connect to my higher self, and then you would get to know like the essence of me. And I was like, that's too weird. Like, I don't want to do that. But yeah, you could diet lettuce, but like lettuce isn't an enlightened being. Lettuce isn't a master plant. I don't think it's going to have that much to teach us.
What are the master plants?
So, I mean, in the Shipibo tradition, there's five main ones. Noyaral, which is the sacred tree of the Shipibo. Bobinsana, which is like a heart opener, and it's also good for stability. Chuachaki, which is the trickster of the jungle. You've got to watch out because it can have a kind of like a dark side as well. Churuxanango, which is very stable. It's a, kind of like a soldier, kind of like a warrior. Amarusa, which they say is an entire hospital. It's the doctor of doctors. And there's also now Blue Lotus, which has began to be incorporated into some Shipibo traditions, largely because of my teacher who's started bringing that in.
And then you don't drink, don't eat, go in isolation for 2 weeks, or you said you can choose.
Yeah.
How long?
So if it's like the first time you're dieting a plant, they say 2 weeks to build that relationship, to get to know it. After that, once you've established that relationship...
And then in that period, you just have the juice of...
Yeah, for like a few days.
For a few days.
Yeah. I remember you can do weeks, months. Some of the old school Shipibos would do years. They go into isolation for years, just in a tambo, just by themselves for years, and getting to know the spirit of this plant.
But then physically it must be very challenging because you need food. You need calories.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I thought Western medicine was challenging. And I started training in Shipibo Cuarenterismo and was like, oh, this is great. You just get to lie in a hammock for 2 weeks. This sounds great. I've been looking forward to this for ages. But then actually being in complete isolation and like literally starving, like your body thinks that you're dying. It's so challenging. It's so challenging. You build this focus, you build this strength in your mind. It's challenging in a different way that we don't have in kind of Western society and kind of Western academia.
Because to me that sounds like solitary confinement in an Iranian prison.
I mean, in solitary confinement, I've thought about this quite a lot, but in solitary confinement, you don't have a purpose, right? The purpose is to destroy your personality. That's why you're put there. Whereas the purpose of this is to connect with the divine being. You're doing it for a purpose. You're doing it as an act of devotion of how much you want to get to know this divine being. How much are you willing to give? How serious are you about this relationship? So I think that the intention there is super different, and that changes everything.
No, I'd say solitary confinement as well as a hunger strike. And some people, I have, being Iranian, I have many friends who ended up in prison, and they find those experiences rather spiritual as well.
Interesting. Yeah. And I guess there's a purpose there, right?
Yeah.
There's a reason to why they're doing them, a reason to why they're on hunger strike, for example.
Yes. Yes. Fascinating. Shipibo Cosmology.
Yeah. What do you want to know?
What is it?
What is it? It's the Shipibo way of understanding the world. So, I mean, there are many things that we can talk about in terms of Shipibo cosmology. I mean, central to Shipibo healing, and actually their understanding of the world, is sound, is vibration. The traditional Shipibo medicine songs are called icaros, and they're these beautiful melodies which are sung in ceremonies. They're actually freestyled. They're always freestyled. When you're learning, you might kind of learn some set icaros, but actually, when you go into ceremony, you're singing to open up the ceremony. You're singing what you see. You're singing to heal the specific people that you're working with. And each of the Shipibo icaros, they all have a unique pattern associated with them, this unique kuna pattern, this unique geometric, beautiful design. And these kuna are also central to the Shipibo cosmology as well. So each individual person would have its own kuna associated with it. Each individual plant, each individual animal. So that's this geometric design, which is kind of like an energetic fingerprint. It's kind of like a blueprint as to who we are. It represents, kind of who we are in the world, where we fit into the web of life, everything about us. But then kuna also exists between two different people. So, for example, there would be a unique kuna design between you and I. Who are we when we're together? What is our energy like when we're together? Who are we as colleagues, as friends, as whatever it is? And then there's also a kuna design associated with everybody who's here at this conference. Who are we as a people, as an organization? What is the energy? What is the vibe of this place? And so, according to the Shipibo, illness actually occurs when there's a disruption or a blockage to that kuna design. And so when the curanderos drink ayahuasca, they'll look to see where that disruption, where that distortion is, and then they'll try to fix it. They'll try to return it to a state of balance. And they do that through singing these beautiful icaros. And so that, according to the Shipibo, is how illness and how health and how healing works.
With their voice.
Exactly. It's all vibration. It's all vibration. And so in ayahuasca ceremonies, the way that the icaros are sung is kind of like a stepwise progression. So you would normally start off by kind of opening up the space. So you would introduce yourself. This is in Shipibo. So I would normally say something along the lines of, I am here humbly, I only have good thoughts. I'm calling in the spirits of my ancestors. I'm calling in the spirits of the plants that I work with, my allies. I ask permission from the Nuta Ibo to be able to provide this healing. And then after that, I begin to put in some protection. You put in this protection. So you call in your guerrilla soldiers. You put them around, the building that you're working in, normally in Maloka. You put your armor on, your protective spiritual armor, and then towards the center of the ceremony, towards the peak, then you'll be removing these energetic blockages. You'll be providing the healing. And the tone and the timbre of the icaros, they really represent where you're at within that structure. So to begin with, quite often, the icaros are very melodic because you have this introduction, you're humbly asking the spirits to work on your behalf. So they quite often sound like, ba, 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 very gentle. You're opening up the space. But then by the middle, when you're trying to remove these energetic blockages, the tone is really different. It's kind of and it's not always that nice to listen to. It can be like nails on a chalkboard, but it's functional, right? It's a spiritual tool that's there to remove these energetic blockages. That's there to restore the balance to the kuna patterns and to your designs. Yeah, that's a little bit about Shipibo cosmology.
And what's the story of the serpent?
Yeah, so the serpent is Ronin, who is this giant anaconda. And according to the Shipibo, Ronin created the whole world. And the coils within Ronin, they represent the cycles within our lives. So we spoke a bit about, energy being recycled from the past, energy being recycled from different people and ancestors within our being. But it's also the cycles within our own human lives. So the Shipibo describe us going through certain patterns within our lives. So, certain cycles to do with happiness, certain cycles to do with getting older, certain cycles to do with, I don't know, maybe having a family, things like that as well. But it's interesting because Ronin is, as the large anaconda, it represents power and knowledge. But it's not just the Shipibo that have that association with Ronin. So all across the Amazon, there are lots of different traditions who all have this large anaconda at the center of their cosmology. And then even in Western science, we have that too, right? We have the snake that's wrapped around the stick that represents healthcare. Also in the Old Testament, you've got the snake representing power and knowledge.
And then the DNA is also in the shape of...
Yeah, no, I guess so. Yeah. I guess so. Yeah, interesting. And so the Shipibo would always call in Rono within ceremonies and ask for this guidance from him to kind of show them how to heal and to show them how to be a better curandero as well.
So fascinating, Simon.
Yeah.
And you're doing incredible work. You're doing a lot of research into this.
Yeah.
Tell us what Onaya does.
Yeah, so Onaya tries as best as possible to bridge those gaps between the traditional world and between Western knowledge. And so most recently, we've been working with military veterans who have PTSD. Most of them have been, have treatment-resistant PTSD. And so we've been working with Indigenous curanderos to try and treat them in the Amazon rainforest, looking at a variety of things. So looking at psychometrics, so looking at symptoms of depression, anxiety, symptoms of PTSD, but then also using brain imaging, so EEG, looking at epigenetic changes, so the way in which the environment affects our genes, to see if genes that have been dysregulated because of war could be addressed, and that could maybe be reversed. Looking at the effects of ayahuasca on the gut microbiome as well, cognitive tasks, looking at attention, trying to make it as multimodal as possible, trying to see if the traditional way of treating these military veterans could be more beneficial than the Western way. And at the moment, the results that we're getting are super encouraging. So we haven't published it yet, so I need to preface this saying it hasn't been peer reviewed. But at the moment, 84% of our veterans no longer meet our criteria for a diagnosis of PTSD a 6-month follow-up, which is incredible. It's like incredible. It's absolutely amazing. It's like ridiculously good. It's like a ridiculously high, figure. But as part of the work with Onaya, we spend a lot of time with the Indigenous curanderos asking them, what they want to research, what would they like to look at, and this is where it gets really interesting and it gets really fun. So just to give you, I've got so many examples of this, but just to give you one example. So one of the last times I spoke to Rono about this, he said he wanted to look at the effects of different icaros on participants in the ceremony. So he wanted to see the difference of a healing icaro versus the different effects of a protection icaro, for example. And so I immediately thought, oh shit, like how on earth do we look at that from a Western point of view? And so, I sat down with the Onaya team and we started thinking about how we could research that. And we came up with this idea to use EEG hyperscanning, which is when you put multiple EEG caps onto different participants at the same time, and you scan their brains all at the same time. Like, right, we'll do that in ceremonies. And so we did that. And then what we did was to record Rono singing his icaros and then timestamp it so that we had the icaros at the same time as the EEG recordings and translate all the icaros into English so that we could see when Rona was singing a protection icaro, was it having a different effect on the participant's EEG to when he was singing a healing icaro, for example. And I thought that we cracked it, you know, I thought that we'd done really well to be able to try and answer some of Rono's questions. And then when I was speaking to him about it afterwards, he said, well, you know what, Simon, you may well have these caps on all the participants within the ceremonies, but actually I have caps on each of you within the ceremonies, but they're just in the spirit world and you can't see them, and mine are far superior to yours.
Of course.
I know. It's such a mic drop moment. But the reason I'm bringing it up is because, you know, was it the changes in brainwaves that Rona was referring to when he was talking about the impact that icaros have? Almost definitely not. You know, he's talking about this spiritual effect that the icaros have that we can't measure in Western science. And the reason that we can't is because we're not advanced enough in this area.
That's interesting. Do you think there will be a day that we can measure it?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. In the future, I personally don't see any distinction between spirituality and science. I think that they're one and the same thing. It's just that we can't measure a lot of the things that are happening right now. If we don't destroy ourselves, you know, as humanity, maybe in a few thousand years, we'll be able to investigate these kind of infinite dimensions of plants, and we'll know that the spirits reside in these different dimensions, and we'll be able to quote unquote prove it through science. But for now,
not necessarily measure it.
Yeah, I mean, well, now we definitely can't, right? So
Yeah.
now it seems like it's either faith or proof with spirit and science. But actually, I think they're one and the same thing, and they'll eventually start to coincide with each other again in the future.
Not in our lifetime, so.
I mean, that would be amazing. But, I mean, like,
Unless you reincarnate.
Yeah. I think we're going to need a lot more funding into psychedelic research if we're going to start to prove that stuff.
Simon, you're doing great work. I give thanks for everything that you're doing. I really appreciate everything. And I thank you for your time. But I'm sure this conversation will continue in other occasions. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. Yeah, thank you for having me.